Hi, nice to be here. This is my first time at WasteConf and also in Krakow, so it's a pleasure to be able to be here. And today I will be talking about 3D and the future of design. And I'm actually here with my coworker Gonzalo, who is just there. If you could wave. Yeah. Thanks. Yes, so after the talk, if you have any questions for us, feel free to hit us up so we can discuss this topic in more detail. And this animation was, by the way, also made with Spline, thanks to one of our community members, Maurice. So before we start, I have a warm-up question for you. I would like to ask you what first comes to your mind when you think about 3D. Does anyone have something on their mind? Please raise your hand if yes. Right, there. A donut. Nice. Anyone else? No, okay. So in general, it could be something like a cube, yeah, or like a movie or animation, like some generic things. But before we delve into more like what 3D is, I would like just to step back a bit and talk about what we think that it is not. There are some common preconceptions about 3D. Like 3D should not just be a form of a style. And on top of that, it should also be not just a way of an illustration or used for just illustration purposes. And we think that 3D is also not just a trend. 3D is something that is widely applied and adopted already across the world, talking about like healthcare or architecture, movies, or even common things like maps that we use daily. And I would like to ask you, like, how many of you have used the 3D design tool before? Please raise your hand if yes. Oh, nice. How many of you think that it was hard to use it? Okay. Yeah, so here comes the question, like, what makes 3D seem so challenging? We know that 3D is spatial and is much more natural, much more closer to our physical reality. So as we know our world around us, it's pretty similar to that. But if we think about it in the mathematical sense, it can be much more complex because just imagine a 2D geometry, like a rectangle, and it's much more easy to describe it in the 2 dimensions than its 3D counterpart, like a cube. So with 3D, everything is becoming a bit more complex because of the added depth and the added complexity. And that's why I would like to zoom out a bit here and talk about how the complexity of 3D evolved over time. So if you think about 3D, it's during the last centuries developed, or there were like lots of contributions to it, but how we know it today is mostly thanks to the recent developments in the past few decades to computer graphics. And one exciting thing about it is that some of the inventors who invented the early prototypes and the solutions could be still alive among us. Like one of them is Ivan Shatterland, who was working on the Sketchpad at MIT. This was the very first example of a solution where on a vector-based display, they rendered 3D objects with which you could interact with the light pen. And later, this also contributed to the development of object-oriented programming and human-computer interaction in general. And around this time, there were like lots of experimentations going on. Like one of these graduation work from Edwin Cadmull was a computer-animated hand. It was using like mesh deformations and also some shading techniques. And he also later became the co-founder of Pixar. So we can think about these times as like kind of the early stages where the fundamentals of 3D were being developed. And I would like to explain to you like how the basics of it works, just to start it off. So in 3D, you actually have like a virtual object defined somewhere in the 3D space. And to be able to render it on a screen, you just need to create a projection of that object and project it to the surface of a 2D flat environment, which could be your screen. And on top of that, there's also a viewing angle defined by a camera. And there are things like light sources, shadows, materials, so things that we know from the real world, helping us to achieve our rendering goal, which could be a stylized rendering, or it could be also photorealistic. Also, the last like decades, there was like plenty of development, and then they also started to apply these tools in the real world. there were like two major branches that I think are relevant for the design industry. One of these was the CAD tools, or the rise of the CAD tools, which were applied for domains like architecture or mechanical engineering, industrial design. And there were also tools that were aiming for actually the entertainment industry, and within that it could be like visual effects, movies, games. And within these two branches, we also saw like the adoption of two major techniques. One was the pre-rendered content. That means that you had to wait long times to render your content, but you could achieve like very realistic results. And the other one was fully real-time, which maybe was less pretty, but could allow you full interactions, like developing the applications itself like a 3D tool, and could also unlock the making of 3D games. And how we know these two branches today, they are kind of like merging into one, like you can like achieve in real time pretty realistic results already. So it's pretty exciting like how these two branches are emerging. And also there were lots of exciting developments in the field of 3D on the web, like WebGL standardized the way we can render things in the browser, and also WebAssembly was a good example where you could use like very robust solution for creating high-performant applications directly in your browser, so they can be very close to native-like applications. And all of these technologies allowed us to create pretty exciting examples. Now I would like to just walk through you some of these solutions that are today possible with 3D on the web. So it is a great way to create interactive product showcases, and we know that if the customer can get closer to the end product, then they might be more likely to convert as a customer, and also we could reduce the return rates with it because they see in advance what they should or what they would expect. But they can also get closer to the brand through these interactive experiences. Like this one is an interactive customizer for a polo. And it doesn't need to be always serious, so you could just use a playful interaction so you can bring some brand awareness to your brand. But there are also cases when you need to educate people about very complex topics. Like in this case, Coastal Words is about educating people about digital banking, which is a very like hard topic, but they used a very entertaining and playful way of doing it so. You can also use 3D to just involve it in your brand and marketing strategy, and it can help you create immersive and engaging experiences, so you can connect with your audience and then can more easily remember your brand. But it can also just look cool. Also, there is another kind of direction you could take, which is embedding your content into a spatial environment, which can make your audience spend more time with your content, and that way they can learn more about you, and you could like stand out from the crowd. But you also know that there are like specific applications for 3D where you could use it for techniques such as this solution, where you can visualize the data in 3D, which would be otherwise not really possible in 2D or would be much worse. But also what's fascinating is that you could use it for immersive storytelling, and in 3D you are not tied to the physical reality, so if you create a museum experience like this example, you might not need to mimic the real world museum. Like you can have much more creative freedom to actually embed the content into your narrative. All right, so I think these were some cool examples, but I would like to look into the main tools that can be used or how they are actually built today. So we know that to build something like the examples I showed is involving a pretty complex workflow. You need to create your 3D scene. You need to then export it into a development environment, and there you need to involve some coding to make it pretty, add the interactions. And what's worse about it is that then if you would like to iterate on this content, you need to redo all these steps again and again, because there is no like one singular platform that can help you streamline this process and get it to production and host it somewhere. So we think that with Spline you can do that today, and going from a singular experience from your prototype to a production-ready content without the need of involving many difficult steps. But we also know that, yeah, we would like to make it intuitive, and also we would like to make it possible that you can easily collaborate within one streamlined process. But we also know that this is hard, and because there is no like precedent work about 3D tools that much, like it is very hard to match the expectations, because most of the people are coming from traditional 2D interfaces and they have certain ways of working with it, and we are trying to make it easy so they can more easily use our tools but still have some intuition to it. So now I would like to show you how we are trying to tackle these opportunities at Spline. So as I mentioned, at Spline we were trying to make a very easy to use 3D tool that is real-time, collaborative, and like blends into your workflows easily. And we are having a 2D approach for 3D design. So the tools that we are working on and with which you can work within Spline, they are trying to use similar kind of ways of interactions. So for example, you could take a bounding box that you might be familiar with from a 2D tool, and you can easily scale your objects or move them or rotate them. And we recently also launched a feature called screen events, because in 3D you might be constrained by the content and it's harder to make fluid experiences. But with this you can make 3D responsive and adapt it to different screen sizes, which is a problem that was not really solved before, so it's like really hard to think about it because it's much different to render something in 3D compared to like a 2D solution. We also are trying to ease the workflow of creating materials, because in the traditional sense you would need to involve shader coding, and like there are some node-based systems that have a pretty complex setup, but we are just using simple layers where you could stack layers together, blend them, and you can have a familiar experience to create your desired result. And on top of that, we are also trying to make everything intuitive, so the tools should be there for you in the moment that you need them, and you should be able to create lightweight interactions without the need to involve any heavy coding. And all of this can be also exported real-time and production-ready, so you can just grab a URL with a single click and it's live. We also have features such as this example has game controls, physics, and logics, so you could create even more complex experiences within Spline directly. And we also have solutions such as components and instances, so you can create kind of a scalable design system. And all of this, as I mentioned, should be real-time and collaborative, so you can be there together with multiple users and have like a fluid experience. We are also continuously exploring, as it was mentioned in the previous talks about AI, how these emerging technologies could fit into your workflows. We believe that AI should not replace human creativity, but rather it should extend it or help your creativity and your workflow. So we are exploring some features like this one, where you could easily look at different angles for your scene and explore some different stylistic variations. So now I would like to just show you, like, through some examples, what's possible currently with Spline and what are some of the best practices there, if you would like to use it. So it is quite easy to craft a metaphor in 3D, like this example, and they are doing it from Evervault, where they actually show how they secure the customer data into a very robust vault through a playful way, so they could create a more memorable experience for the landing page. We also see this example from Threads, where they have an AI feature for their own product, and they actually use the metaphor of a 3D object which is representing this AI and lighting up the room with real-time shadows and reflections. But we also see some people using it for their portfolios, because they can just be more playful or showcase their skills and their kind of background in a more creative way. But there's also some cases when they can actually highlight the essence of the features of the product that they might have. And with 3D, you might not need to be confined by the theme of your operating system. Like in this example, they have like a light mode and dark mode version as well. This example is from Webflow. They made like I think they made a good job of representing one of their features, which is logic, where they showed through this like 3D scene how this complex feature works or how it is being represented. And sometimes also it can be a much more subtle solution, like this one from scale.com. They're using Spline for a while now, and you could see that they are using a much more simple solution for their branding on the top of the hero, but where more complexity is needed to explain a more complex topic like their data structure, they are using more detail. Or like this example is also a more subtle one from the no-code community, where they just used 3D in the background, so it's not like the highlight or the focus of their branding, but it's just there to represent what their mission is. But why cannot be you just more playful? Like this studio used their value proposition as a 3D text, and then you could just rearrange it and play around with it on their landing page. We also saw a recent work from past year from Giphy, where they used this to create their yearbook, where they actually just summarize what they did the last year as a company, and they use like a more fun way of exploring the features with Spline, such as game controls, physics, and logic. So you could walk around this experience and learn more about their recent years. But it's also an interesting and fascinating direction where people are exploring how 2D and 3D interfaces could blend, like this meditation app example from here. And we also see that the community is continuously pushing the boundaries, what's possible with Spline. Like they might develop special kinds of game mechanics, and I just really recommend to go to the community and play around with some of the examples. We also know that 3D and 2D as an industry is sometimes blended, and we see that even with 3D game engines, people are building 2D games, so kind of the industry is shifting towards these tools because there's just much more flexibility with the 3D approach. We also see that sometimes it can be used like for product showcases. It doesn't always need to be interactive, but you could edit if needed. And 3D just has the flexibility of viewing for the same content from different angles or setting different stylistic variations. And you also have some ready-made templates if you need to. This is from one of our community members who created this with Spline. And with unique technology advancements comes also new challenges. Like in this example, one of our community persons was reimagining the Spotify for the upcoming Vision OS by Apple directly with Spline, where they could spatially explore how they can use or rethink the interface of theirs. So now I would like to just end with a couple of conclusions. We can easily say that 3D is now easy, or at least much more easier compared to when it started, but there's also a long journey ahead of us. 3D is already broadly used within different industries, such as design, animation, healthcare, and we are already problem solving in many areas in 3D. Like, for example, we are also using helpful applications such as 3D maps, and we also see that the AR and VR market is like slowly and steadily growing. And we also, as I mentioned, see some precedents of like people actually using 3D even though they might want just to have a 2D outcome, like 2D animators or visual effects artists. And as I mentioned, 2D games are also often built with 3D software. There are millions of apps today in the App Store that might be a game and that might be built by a 3D software, but the game might be just 2D. And we also know that most architecture design tools, since almost like the inception, mix already 2D and 3D for the floor plan and the spatial aspect. And there is also another field, which is the field of the sound design, which is also shifting towards spatial. And this is my last bullet point in the list, I promise, but I would like to also show you some takeaways for 3D experiences. So we can easily say that it can unlock your creativity because in the spatial aspect, you just have much more options and variability. And it can also increase your brand awareness, and you can engage more in depth with your audience through 3D. And it can also be a good way of educating people about a very complex topic in a more playful way. And last but not least, you are more easy to stand out from the crowd, even if you compare yourself to other 3D solutions, because just of the fact that you have just much more options to play around with, which can unlock creativity. We also see that every year there are new opportunities coming up and use cases, so we are very excited about that. I think it's an exciting opportunity for the mind of the designer, because with that you can uncover yet unknown territories, so you have just much more freedom to define the future within that. And with this, I would like to shout out a special thanks to our community, and they impress us every day. I think it's like a very easy now to start designing in 3D, so I would invite you to start it out and check it out maybe through Spline or other tools, but we can't wait to see what you will be doing next, and thank you for listening.